Is there anything that Florida State did last year that, you're not calling out Mike Norvell for not knowing what he's doing, but, just annoyed you a little bit in terms of, why don't we do this more? Why do we do this too much on either side of the ball? Was there anything that stuck out to you that you would have tweaked a little bit?
Yeah. I think we got too cute offensively at times. And that if you go back to the LSU game,
Spoken by a true fullback, of course.
People can argue. Yeah, I mean, it worked a few drives earlier. Give the ball to the damn fullback on the 1 yard line. But you don't want to necessarily pitch, and it's not so much that the pitch was a bad play call. It's just you don't want you have a lead. You don't need to be dangerous. That's the problem. Like, just even if you ran, I think it was first down when we got there. If you got stopped on 4 quarterback sneaks, I'd rather that, and then they drive down the field off of that than the way that they ended up driving down the field. The game is completely different. You've won. You're up by 3 scores at that point, if I remember correctly. Game, set, match. But then you took that same mentality going into NC State, where all you needed was a point. You just needed one. You needed a field goal, even though we missed some field goals. But there was no need to go for, well, I'm going to put it like this. I'm not running a fade route with the 5'10" wide receiver. When the 7 guy is like, excuse me, I'm not running a fade route to my quarterback's left with the short wide receiver and then don't go out the back of the end zone where it's an us or nobody ball. I'm going to go 6'7" guy to my quarterback's dominant hand and go up top. Or our running game has been working. It's second down. We got plenty of time to be able to get to a situation where we score. I think we got too cute and we lost. And we got beat with that. I think same thing with Wake Forest. We didn't have a great game plan in the first half going up against Wake Forest. Everybody talks about Coach Fuller and the defense and the lack thereof, but nobody talks about how we have like the defense being put in fourth. It's in too many situations because the offense was cute and the offense didn't put up enough points to win the game. So I think that would be where my critique would be. But then I stepped back and I realized last year was Coach Norvell's 7th year as a head coach. So in the 3rd year on the stage in a fishbowl. No offense to Memphis, nobody's really looking at Memphis like that. People were looking at, no matter what the Florida situation is with Florida State, people remember what Florida State was. So there's always going to be eyes and attention on Florida State, good or bad. So I think that in of itself lends a little bit of a pressure that Mike's having first. So like Mike's first time in a lot of things have been at Florida State. His first time in a major rivalry game on primetime TV was against the University of Florida in Gainesville. Should have won that game. We lost because of situations. His first time on national TV, but he took that and remembered it, and he won against LSU. But I think he was still his first time in a situation where all eyes are on you. And I think from a coach's perspective, that's a lot of pressure as well. Mike got gray hair, and it looks like he's older than what he is. But I always tell people, I'll be 39 next month. I think Mike is 2 or 3 years older than me. So actually, Mike took this job. He might be 3 years older than me because Mike took this job at just turned 40 years old. And that's a young head coach to not have any head coaching experience. And I think his coordinator experience was only like a year or two at Arizona State. Yeah, Arizona State ain't Florida State.
And just to play off the first situation that you brought up, and we were all thinking it at the time, that they make a pitch down at the goal line trying to extend to a 2-score lead and basically ice the game, is that you're also dealing with a different team than you're dealing with right now. And I'm making some assumptions here, but you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, most likely. And that's the psyche of the team's pretty fragile at that point. Like, none of those players had ever been successful at the collegiate level. You know, they played on 5-win teams, 3-win teams, 6-win teams for the guys that had been around that long. So they'd never won a game of that magnitude against what turned out to be a top 10 opponent. And so if you lose that game, the first game of the season, you're playing with a team that's maybe a little fragile psychologically. And if you blow that game, then maybe the season doesn't go the same way.
Definitely. They were confident but unsure because nobody had ever been in a position, like nobody knew how to win. I'm trying to think. Even none of your transfers even came from programs where they were just the alphas. So everybody in this situation, and that's the other thing where I tend to forgive a little bit because nobody had ever been in those situations. I take for granted. So my first time ever seeing Mike Norvell's practice, obviously right before the world shut down. And then I remember people didn't look like they knew where they were going. I took for granted that when I went to Florida State, one, we had freshman two-a-days. But then when you came back, there was like 7 guys who had been at Florida State before who I could just follow them and know where to go. So when the whistle blew, horn blew, you just follow those guys. And then you're going to go to the next drill. So just simple things like that. You're following people who have been in your footsteps before. They can tell you what it's like in Miami. They can tell you what it's like to win national championships. When I got there were guys who had been used to winning. There were guys who could tell you how cool a bowl game was. I don't think they had anybody on their roster who could tell you how cool it is to really go to a big time bowl game. And that was just Orlando. So that wasn't even really a big time bowl game, but it was bigger than what we had been used to because we hadn't been to a real bowl in so many years. So I think a lot of that comes into play. And Coach Norvell couldn't tell you that because he had never coached in a bowl game, I believe, up until that point. Or was it a champ? Yeah, no.
Well,
yeah,
he
I
coached
think he
in
coached
bowl
in
games
one,
at Memphis.
But he had never. But it's just
sure.
He can't really. Nobody knew, and so now you have guys who know, and it works out differently.